January is the perfect month to do sewing projects. It's too cold to be out in the garden and it's nice to stay in and warm. So I went ahead and did Retro Butterick 1944. This is a reproduction pattern. I don't believe I've made a reproduction pattern yet, but I could be wrong. Maybe I did one of the negligees. But anyhow, I'm going to be making a mixture of style A and B from this pattern. And I'm going to remove the collar. I'm going to do the 3/4 length sleeves. No sash, no buttons. I'm going to keep it rather simple. And I think you're going to love this video. If you like it, please give it a thumbs up. Please leave a comment. What kind of projects are you working on? And let's get right into the video. Well, we must start with a cup of tea, of course. And I am having none other than Lady Grey or perhaps English breakfast. Those are two of my favorite. So the first off thing, of course, is to read everything that you possibly can on the pattern. All of the instructions, everything that will be necessary to complete this project. They give a lot of information within this pattern. They give even a glossary. So if this is one of your first times sewing, you could use this pattern. I think it would be a bit difficult if it's your first pattern, but I was pleasantly surprised at the glossary and all of the information that they included. Okay, so looking at this, I'm going to do a bit of a mix of A and B design. I want to do 3/4 length sleeves, but no collar. I do not want the bow, but I may add on the buttons later. We will see. So this is what it looks like in the drawings. As you can see, the back has 3 panels, the side has lots, or the front has lots of gathers. I think it's going to be very lovely. All right, so let's peruse a little bit closer the instruction sheet. You'll notice you need your body measurements, so you can select the correct size. And then there's, of course, some references of how you can lay out and cut the pattern pieces. We have indications of whether it's right side, wrong side of fabric, what that pattern piece will look like. We have the glossary, and then we start on the first step. Okay, so there are several sheets. This pattern comes with both English and French instructions, as well as a glossary on the actual pattern pieces with other languages to help if a non-native English speaker is using this. Okay, so having perused all of that, let's enjoy our tea while it's hot, because once I get sewing, we know that tea will go cold quickly. Inevitably, that happens to me. I think I need some sort of a tea warmer. So here is my fabric. I'm going to be using a rayon that also has some spandex, so it has some stretch to it. Now, having chosen this fabric, if I was going to do this pattern again, I would have gone with a different material, something without stretch, because there's a whole another level of difficulty when you use stretch fabric. Nevertheless, it did work out fine. Okay, so of course I've got to cut all of my pattern pieces out and make sure I select the ones that I will be needing. This takes a bit of time, so often I watch a television show or usually a classic movie while working on my projects, because it takes quite a bit of time. So I have selected a size smaller than I normally would go with because of the stretch in my fabric. And honestly, I could have gotten away with even a smaller size. So that's something to be cautious of if you do this pattern yourself. After having cut out all of the pattern pieces, then of course I have to go and press each one of them so that they'll be nice and flat to go on my fabric before cutting the fabric out. So I use a low iron level setting. Since this is not a true vintage pattern, that is, it's a remake of a vintage pattern, I don't worry so much and handle it quite as much with care as I would if it was a real vintage pattern. So then I laid out all of my pattern pieces according to the guide in the instructions, and then I sewed the darts onto the bodice portion. Darts make everything fit so lovely. I don't know why modern clothing rarely includes them, except for the fact that they are more work, but they make your clothes look so much better. And then it had me put some gathers onto the shoulder area. So I made my gathers and then stitched the shoulder seams together. Also, I stitched the sides together, as you can see. The pieces here that had some gathers between notches, and then I stitched the back panels together. So looking at the instructions again, kind of can show you here the step-by-step of what I did. And it seemed a bit intimidating at first, but it was not that difficult. Now we're moving on to a bit of a more challenging section, which is the facing. So you have to cut out inner facing. It calls for stitch-on inner facing, but I had fusible. So I used fusible, and then I went ahead and basted it on just to make sure it stayed in place. And then you stitch those pieces together and then include the back facing, as I'm showing here in the instructions. So here I have my inner facing with the front facing and the back facings, and I'm just going to baste those on, just to really make sure that nothing goes sliding around in the wrong place. I was so excited to do my first 1940s reproduction pattern. I love the 1940s, and I was very interested to see what this type of clothing would look like on me. Alright, so here we have all of the pieces, and we're ready to go ahead and put these front facings and stitch the bottom part together. So here I have a line drawn, and that's where I'm going to stitch from that line to the bottom, connecting these pieces. This part was a bit tricky and a little intimidating, but it worked out just fine. Okay, and then I finished the outside edge of the facing by using like a ribbon overlock stitch. Now I'm going to attach it to the garment. This was tricky, and I did end up hand stitching the very corner. And then I did the understitching, as you can see here. Though obviously not perfectly, but it still turned out quite well. I was very happy with it.
Okay, now we're ready to move on to the zipper portion of this pattern. However, my fabric is rayon with some elastic, so it has stretch to it. That means it can fit close enough to my body, but it still can stretch enough. That way I can just ease it on over my head without any issue. So actually I'm going to omit the zipper, but if you make this pattern, of course, with fabric that doesn't have stretch, you will need that zipper portion, and it's easily enough added in. Okay, so for me, I'm gonna move on to the sleeves, stitching the darts on the sleeves, and then easing those sleeves into the dress.
For the sleeves, I was going to make them long, and then I realized, you know what? I will make them 3/4 sleeves because I love 3/4 length sleeves, and It was so much simpler than making the long sleeves, and more versatile, so I could wear it for fall, spring, or winter if I had a sweater over the top. So of course I needed to start with marking the darts, because there were darts on the sleeve, which again make it very unique, and that's something I love about vintage patterns. You're not going to find a garment with dart sleeves almost ever on modern clothing. So I love this water-soluble pen. It's hard to see on this particular fabric, and because it's wintertime, the lighting is not so good in my sewing room. But it works really well, and it quickly disappears as soon as I apply water. So I use my pen, as well as a sewing straight pen and a ruler to draw the darts before pinning them in place. I could make a dart tutorial. If that's something you would be interested in, please leave a comment and I can make that in a future video. So I always put a pin at the very point of the dart, just so I can easily know when sewing exactly where the end is going to be and aim for that spot. Now there were 3 small darts, so this did take a bit of time, but I think it's well worth it for the character that it brings to the garment, as well as the fit. After sewing the darts, then I, of course, stitched the sides of the sleeve together. And I did a gathering stitch along the top for easing in the sleeve in place. I would love to get a vintage sewing machine. I've looked at them several times, but I haven't been convinced yet about which one I want to get. And since I live in South Korea, I would probably need to get either a Korean or a Japanese vintage machine, which might have features on it that I have a harder time figuring out. So I'm not quite ready for that. I just use my heavy-duty Singer. But maybe in the future I will invest in one of those. I've heard they hum so sweetly compared to the more modern machines that are just loud and bang around. The thing I did was, of course, hem the bottom of the dress, as well as, of course, hem the sleeves. So I hope you have enjoyed this video. Please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, and here it is on me. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.